Did Ukraine just attack the USA? Immediately after the Moscow attack, even before the number of dead were finalised, the US government and Western media were absolutely clear who had carried out the attack and who had definitely, absolutely not been involved. Now we have a massive media event and the key participation of an individual from a belligerent nation is somehow missed by mainstream media. And a further critical anomaly is also not being reported, not even by Redacted, who are absolutely decent and honourable people with integrity as far as I'm concerned. So I'm going to do what I do, which is to review the evidence and point out a blatant anomaly for your consideration. What you decide to make of it, I leave entirely up to you. I had zero interest in a ship running into a bridge in Baltimore, barring the extensive news coverage, slow news day, or the hunger humans have for the unusual and catastrophic. However, there are several key facts about the incident, as reported by Redacted, link in the description, that are unusual, and one key fact that they misreport, just human error, nothing sinister. It's a bit like Imperial College coming out with a devastating and misrepresentative research report the same month they receive massive funding from a certain oligarch. When unusual events coincide to support a narrative, it's worth paying attention. The first unusual observation, check the Redacted video, apart from the multiple astonishing power losses of a modern container ship, is that of all the nations 200 plus in the world, where did the ship's master come from? Not Latvia, not ISIS-K land, not Greece or South America, but a small nation that is being crushed despite receiving all the West's support and about to be dropped by the USA like a bad relative. Yup, Ukraine. Okay, coincidence, bad choice of nationality, hey-ho. But then we get Telegram social media posts saying in effect, you don't fund us, this is what happens. Kooks and cranks? Maybe not. It's a threat that the Ukrainian Uber thugs had already made some months ago, reminding the West that a lot of Ukrainians were now in Western countries, and you know, bad things happen when people get angry. And terror is not some last resort for a desperate regime, though they are now a desperate regime. Terror is a proud Ukrainian regime trait. From 80 plus citizens in the Odessa fire 2014 as I recall, a great day for Ukraine according to Right Sector, to 14,000 citizens of the Donbass in the 8 years of war against the ethnic Russians who'd previously carried and won the pro-Russian democratically elected government. To the citizens of Donetsk, where Ukraine used its precious ammunition, including Western munitions, not against the Russian military, but against a civilian population. No mention of that in the media, of course. Then assassinations in Russia, which the West deplored, yet the CIA and Washington Post recently bragged about training Ukraine in such. Then Belgorod incursions against civilian towns using Western vehicles and munitions and missile attacks, again with Western-supplied munitions. Then the Moscow attack, where, the US knew immediately that Ukraine was not involved, and how dare Putin conduct his own investigation rather than relying on Western media. And the Ukrainian head of one of its intelligence black ops arms bragging that Moscow was great, there'd be more, bigger and deeper. These US and Western-sponsored thugs have a hard-on for killing civilians, using Western money, arms and training to support their habit. And what does the USA do when it sees that against all odds, crushing economic sanctions aren't working, massive hundreds of billions of dollars in aid and weapons aren't working, the vaunted Abrams tanks and Patriot missiles aren't working, which is priceless. There's $1 billion of Patriot gone every time a battery is targeted and destroyed. Well, the USA does what it does. It bails. After all, it had no skin in the game, making it a great investment, according to US Senator Lindsey Graham. Now, you're a crack addict, funded and supplied by the USA, and the USA decides no more crack for you. How do you respond? When the people you funded are armed, dangerous and unhinged, you don't get to just bail and walk away, not when they know where you live. There's a certain schadenfreude if it turns out that the nest of vipers the US, UK and EU have raised over the years have decided that no, you don't get to quit on us. So let me just play one tiny segment of the bridge misfortune, one that Clayton Morris, reporting someone else's observation, slightly misstated, I believe. He talks about the ship changing direction before it loses power the first time. Maybe go double check and do the research. What is far more dramatic and significant is the massive change in direction after power recovery before the second failure, when the ship was now directed irrevocably against the pillar support of the bridge. There's a few points to make. These ships are massive. You don't handle them like a sports car. Everything is gentle and measured, because that's a huge amount of mass to correct if it's going in the wrong direction. 2. The ship was headed safely out to sea, headed for the big gap between the supports. Now, if you lose power when you're headed safely at the gap, what do? Breathe a huge sigh of relief that at least you're headed safely for the gap as you scream at your engineer to get power back. Like aquaplaning, if it happens, you don't touch a thing. Let the car glide literally over the surface until you have grip again. What did this master captain do? Made a massive turn at a huge rate. I'm astonished looking at it that the ship had that potential available. And note again the huge plume of smoke, not to avoid the turn, but to power it. But hey, I'm sure we'll get the black box or equivalent, and I'm sure it didn't intentionally hit the bridge, right? Maybe Putin's passport will be found in the ruins, proving that Putin did it. We all know how well events support the narrative when that's convenient. Why not? So despite being headed safely for the gap upon power recovery, the ship makes a massive powered turn onto a collision course with a pylon, losing power again as soon as the direction made impact inevitable. That's fact. Watch the video. If someone is headed safely to avoid a civilian structure, but makes a massive powered turn to hit the structure, you have to ask why. Mistakes were made, my hand slipped, Russian bots. One thing is for sure, the USA is not going to be screaming terror attack and we need to invade Ukraine. So no, I'm not advancing any theory, I'm telling you yet again what is immediately obvious and factual from the evidence. That ship, despite being safely headed for the gap, made a drastic powered turn onto a course that made impact inevitable and then lost power, allowing the scenario to play out. If a drunk driver loses control of a bus and crashes into a crowd of civilians, then that person is very reasonably held to account for their grievously irresponsible action. Someone made a conscious, controlled, massively powered turn away from safety to ensure that impact was inevitable. Whether Ukrainian master, Russian bots, deep state or hand of God, someone is to blame. There was zero threat from the initial power loss if the ship would continue on safely through the gap, which from the video appears to be the case. The only threat came because the ship did something absurd under the circumstances, making a massive powered turn into the bridge pylon with inevitable consequence. I think it would be very reasonable to ask why. Here is the video after our sign-off. Go check out the redacted piece and add it to a long list of death and destruction at the hand of US-sponsored agents or God or Putin, depending on who you feel like blaming. Andrew Mather, andrewmatherexplore@gmail.com.